Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we'd love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Clive Langer, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Worked with Alan Winstanley for decades and produced hits with the likes of Dexy's Midnight Runners, Madness, Elvis Costello, Teardrop Explodes, China Crisis, David Bowie and Mick Jagger, all those exciting ones. Was also in Deaf School in Liverpool, from Liverpool in the 70s and onwards, but has got a new album out and a new band. The band is called the CLANG Group and the album is New Clang, out on Fretsaw Records. So this is the interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject of the early formative years. Clive, it's over to you.
Yeah, I'm the same sort of milestone, but I'm 70.
Yes.
So I was born in 54. And so by the I was like 8 when the Beatles' first record came out. I loved the Shadows. I liked the sound of electric guitars and everything. But the first actually bit of vinyl that I owned was I had an older brother, so he had Cliff Richard's records and whatever, and moved on to Motown. And he was, I was hearing things that I wouldn't normally hear because he was 3 years older. But I was brought up with the Beatles. The first vinyl I had was the first Bob Dylan album.
Right.
That I owned. That was the first album that I owned. I probably had Shadows singles and things like that beforehand. But, because this music, I was hearing it through the door from his bedroom into mine. And I was hearing initially kind of mod music, soul, Sam and Dave, things like that, Aretha, Otis, into Motown, then into psychedelia. And he went from being a mod to a hippie, so I did. And, in primary school when I was 11, I'd started a band. And as you do, we did a version of House of the Rising Sun. So that would have been 65.
Yes.
I was obsessed. I was always obsessed. And, if there was a woodwork project, I'd make a copy of an electric guitar. And if I had to write the history of something, it would be musical instruments. And so I didn't do much musical training in the proper form of the word, but I did. I learned to play the guitar, when I was about 10 or 11. Not very well. I've never been like a virtuoso or anything, but I did it and played the guitar and started a band.
Yes.
We were called the Blues because we wore blue polo necks, very groovy.
And was this all in London?
Yeah. That was in Swiss Cottage. Our first and only gig was the Swiss Cottage Odeon.
Yes. So when you got to 67, which was, you would have been 13 at that time, which is, quite getting quite, you have a bit more awareness. Were you picking up that kind of summer of love vibe and the kind of the beautiful people on the streets and going down to Carnaby Street and slightly getting tuned in, turned on and dropping out?
Yeah, completely. But I wasn't allowed to because I lived with my parents, but I lived in Hampstead, went to school in Kentish Town, and it backed onto Hampstead Heath. So all my leisure time was spent on the Heath and in Hampstead Village, and it was pretty groovy. Mick and Keith had a place up the road, and Donovan was writing the Hampstead Incident, which was about the everyman and everything. And you'd kind of spot celebs around. And then if we went out of Hampstead, it would be to Notting Hill Gate. We kind of got into doing things we shouldn't be doing at a very young age. So I was very focused on the music scene.
Yes, I guess your O levels were taking a battering at this level.
Well, yeah, I think my brain took a battering from the age of 13, and my memory has never been very good ever since.
You've been in the moment. So then we got to 69, Brian Jones passes away. Then, the end of the Beatles, then Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison all die that year. You're 16, you're leaving school, but then the 60s end on a bit of a downer. How do you sort of, at that age, we take things so seriously, don't we?
Yeah.
And are so committed, and these people are so important to our lives.
I didn't really let it bring me down. I was still kind of young, so they were a bit old. They were 27 and I was like 16 or whatever. And, 69, I was 15, 16. And I kind of got into through Hendrix probably, and Cream and improvising and everything. I got into the kind of what Miles Davis was doing with Bitches Brew, which led to John McLaughlin and Weather Report and all that kind of thing. So I was kind of sitting down and really listening to stuff, as well as enjoying albums by the Kinks and Dan Hicks and his Hot Licks a bit later probably. And one of my best friends was a guy called Ben Barson, who was Mike Barson from Madness's older brother. And he was an incredible musician, very talented. And I used to spend all my time around his place, and I'd be playing rhythm guitar while he played lead, and we would just... and we were going to, I could go and see any band I wanted. I mean, I saw Zeppelin in Klook's Cleek, which was a tiny room above a pub. I saw Hendrix a few times and would go to festivals and.
Did you go to the Glastonbury Festival was it 71 at that stage?
No, I didn't. I was talking to Julian Temple actually last week, who I was at school with. He went there. I didn't go to that. We both went to we were talking about what we went to, and we went to the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, and we saw Eric playing with Lennon and Keith Richards and Mitch Mitchell. That was quite a band, Hendrix and Cream, and they were the big ones really. And
what about Jeff Beck? Did you?
I wasn't a big Jeff Beck kind of person. I sort of liked the song he never liked, the pop record, Heart Silver Lining.
That won't be spoken, yes, quite.
Yeah. I mean, I like Mickey. Mickey Most used to produce, he produced those Donovan records, and Jeff Beck, he produced quite cool things, and he made them quite palatable to people like me, like Hurdy Gurdy Man or something.
Yes.
And they were Mickey Most productions. So he was doing all these blatant pop stuff, but he was making cool people sound poppy without you realising. It's quite clever.
Well, yes, absolutely, dear old boy. It was just, God, a sad story though about the asbestos, wasn't it? And
yeah.
Yes, horrendous. What a thought. Yeah, we thought it was an amazing substance, but not good at all, was it really? So then, there's like John McLaughlin. Sounds very high. I did a interview with the guy who did Band Aid. He did the vocals on "Do They Know It's Christmas," and he talked about his career as a producer. I can't remember his name. No.
Yeah,
but he said that it was quite horrendous because he was in the studio with John McLaughlin, two other serious musos. And he said, one day he'll write the book, but the police were called, lawyers were called. It was like very tense kind of times doing work with those guys. So obviously you didn't work with them, but listening to it must have been quite studious. You're still in your teens at this stage, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, we were pushing, because of, if you listen to, Hendrix is Still Raining, Still Dreaming, all that, so Electric Ladyland. It branches out. It's kind of blues, but it's jazzy as well. Hendrix, before he died, was booked in to play with Miles Davis, but that session never happened because Hendrix died. But so it's an example of how everything was crossing over.
Yes.
And then Miles came out with albums that kind of had rock rhythms, and so we were moving with them. It wasn't like we moved from one thing to the other. one thing morphed into another. And there were, rock musicians playing with jazz musicians. There were people like, Manfred Mann's Chapter 3, which was like a jazz band, or John Heisman's Colosseum, or even, I used to go and see Ossie Bisa. And there was like jazz, African jazz elements. It was all there, As soon as you start improvising, there's going to be jazz.
Yeah. What about Steve Howe and that kind of world of...
I was a bit anti-prog.
Right.
It didn't matter if people could play really well. Of the jazz guys could play really amazingly, and they really expressed themselves. I thought a lot of the rock musicians who were really great players were just kind of technical, like classical musicians, like really good at doing what they're doing. But what are they doing? Playing clever kind of music, but it didn't sound like there was that much soul in it, really, to me.
No.
At that time.
Yes, but then you got into, you didn't get into, but you mentioned Led Zeppelin. What about those other kind of, that other strand of like Black Sabbath and rock? Or was it more the jazz?
I like Free because there was soul in it again. I didn't like heavy metal, but I did quite like Blue Cheer because they were like the loudest band in the world. I kind of was a bit intrigued by them. Almost like Mountain, Felix Pappalardi. I didn't like those, those Saxon Deep Purple types.
No.
I mean, I like it more now. I liked Hush, the first Deep Purple single, but that was organ based. It wasn't like the rest of Deep Purple or what was going to happen, which was, I didn't like heavy riffs. They didn't on their own. I mean, yeah, when the I like Satisfaction. It's a great riff, but I like You Really Got Me, but heavy metal, again, I found it a bit cold.
Yes. So when we got to 74, you were 20 then. I mean, glam had sort of very much happened, and obviously we had those kind of classics as well as people like David Bowie and Lou Reed happening. So what was your kind of musical moment when you hit 20?
74, we'd started Deaf School. I was at Liverpool Art College. I've been at Canterbury. Ian Dury had been a tutor there, so there was a band called Kilburn and the High Roads playing there, and I went to see all the pub rock bands. I liked them. Chilly Willy and the Red Hot Peppers. Obviously, Dr. Feelgood, stood out amongst them.
What about Dr. Strange? Doctors of Madness.
I didn't get into them, but I think we used to share the stage with them occasionally, or they'd always be on the week before Deaf School or whatever. I didn't really know them actually.
Yes.
But I heard about them a lot. But anyway, 74, Deaf School kicked off, and by 75 we were playing and creating a bit of a buzz in Liverpool.
Yes.
And we were kind of, again, it was a band that, I couldn't play technically, jazz or clever music, prog or whatever. So we were kind of listening to Roxy Music, the Kinks, and I was in an orchestra called the Portsmouth Sinfonia, which was an orchestra that couldn't play, and I was playing the flute. It was like an art project, and we played the Albert Hall. We played the classics, but no one could really play. So it was an orchestra where you tried to follow the music. And Brian Eno was in it. So it was a conceptual thing. So it helped with the idea of Deaf School. With Deaf School, we had people in the band who were interesting-looking people, strong characters, and they weren't the best musicians in the college.
No.
The drummer wasn't the best drummer, but he looked the best, and he could drum a bit. And as we played more and more, we got more proficient and went on. And by 75, I think we won the Melody Maker competition that sort of sent us into record company offices.
That's good. Because you mentioned festivals at that stage, there was a lot of kind of alternative lifestyles appearing in the early and mid 70s up to, I suppose, the late... to the 80s, really, before things started falling apart. Did you continue on that kind of 3-day festy period? Did you go to many other
No, I went to the Isle of Wight, saw Hendrix. I went to Woburn Abbey and saw Hendrix, but they were earlier, really, or 71, I suppose, Hendrix at the Isle of Wight. But I mean, after that, I think the pub rock thing took over. So the hippie festivals seemed a bit hippie-like after a while,
Yes.
or they were expensive and they were, heavy metal bands. So I wasn't a wandering minstrel going off to festivals. I was trying to organise this unruly bunch of 15 people and organise this band called Deaf School rather than going away for the weekend.
Yes, well, absolutely. And what were you studying at Liverpool Art College?
Art.
Art, fine art?
Yes, sorry.
Well, there could be fashion or sculpture.
We were asking for that one. Yeah, we were all studying art, except the sax player, he was studying physics. But we were either students or tutors from Liverpool Art College. And
Right.
the bass player, Steve Average, he later went on to be the Planets. And he was the only one out to hit record, actually, later with the Planets. He was doing graphics, but the rest of us were in the Fine Art Building, which is now LIPA. It used to be Liverpool College of Art.
Yes, and were the Fabulous Poodles, were they sort of happening at that sort of period as well?
Yeah, sort of late-ish Deaf School period, but again, I don't know their music. I just saw their name. I mean, I wasn't. If anything was a bit similar to Deaf School, I didn't really go for it.
Right.
They were competition probably. So we're not going to mess about with them.
No, but then can you remember your first kind of time in the studio? Was kind of music kind of quite important, or were you still thinking, I'm doing the art and then I'll go back to something
No,
art related?
music was always important to me, like always the most important thing. I went to art college because John Lennon went there.
Right.
My second choice college was Birmingham because there was a music college next to it. That's why I went to these colleges, because there were no music colleges that you could go to in those days to study modern music unless it was, Shostakovich or something, or it was, you went to art college if you wanted to be in a band. The Yardbirds, the Beatles, the Stones, it was all an art college thing, the Kinks.
Yes. And I guess, yeah.
Roxy Music.
And you also
Roxy.
got a grant. I mean, people forget that you get a grant or got a grant in that time. And also you probably could sign on unemployment for Christmas and Easter and summer holidays and get housing benefits. So it was quite a nice little number for 3 years, really.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky. My parents were quite middle class. They money. My father could contribute towards my grant. I didn't, and I'd go home. I'd actually used to work at art college at night. When I was at Canterbury, I worked in a hamburger place in Canterbury that was similar to the Hard Rock. So it's kind of fun-ish, but I made quite a bit of money, so I could then travel in America for 6 weeks, and I had relatives over there. And then I started at Liverpool, so I'd had this experience of crossing America with a small amount. I worked when I was in America as well, painting cartoon cells for the Sonny and Cher show. So I was kind of lucky, life. I just got on with it and got involved in interesting projects. And then Deaf School sort of took off, and I didn't finish my degree. I never finished a degree, so we were making an album for Warner's instead.
Yes, well, absolutely. On your American trip, did you start sort of evoking the spirit of On the Road and Jack Kerouac, and then look and read and Ginsberg and Burroughs and Tom Wolfe and Hunter S. Thompson?
No, I kind of read them later, actually, probably, or maybe I'd maybe read the book about Hell's Angels on Hunter S. Thompson, but no, it was more like, thinking about the Rolling Stones on the road, and it was the punk had started. We'd played CBGBs and the Whiskey, and the Damned had been there 2 weeks before,
Right.
They'd just beaten us, and we were considered punky, but in America, but in England we were like art students,
Yes.
And it was only after punk, when it became new wave, that we were kind of all bunched together. But our tour of America was amazing. I mean, we were just Warner's really looked after us because Derek Taylor signed us from the Beatles fame, and he was well respected. So he made sure we were well looked after.
God, you got a good deal. How many? What was the contract? Did you have a sort of, was it 3-album deal with Warner's?
Well, we left after 3 albums because none of them sold that many. But we left. We broke our contract. They let us out. So we probably had a 4-album deal or something. We were actually signed straight to Burbank. We weren't signed to England. So we were like an American signing. It was kind of bonkers because, in fact, Virgin wanted to sign us, and in lots of ways they would have understood us a lot more, and the journey would have been a different journey. But
Yes.
we had an amazing journey, even if we didn't sell loads of records. I mean, the first album I think did probably 30,000 or something, which was okay. But in those days, then the next one only did 8, or. Whereas these days, if you sold 8,000, you'd be number one.
Well, absolutely. I know. The indie charts in the 80s, those record sales, you'd be straight in, wouldn't you? No,
I know all about that because of Madness. We were selling at Madness, if they were having a sort of top 3 record, you're selling 30,000 a day.
Yes, which is quite amazing. So when you did your first album, Second Honeymoon, for Deaf School, was this with Muff Winford,
Winwood.
Yes.
Stevie Winwood's brother, and they were both in the Spencer Davis band. Muff was the bass player, and he had produced that Scottish band, the what's it called, the Tartan.
Oh, the Bay City Rollers.
Yeah, he'd produced them. Warner thought he was a cool kind of guy, nice guy, and they thought it would be a good idea for him to work with us. And he did, but it sort of collapsed. I didn't understand quite where he was coming from, and I wanted it to be more like a pub rock band. I wanted Chris Thomas or, someone like that to produce us, or Nick Lowe. I wanted the cool guys to produce us, and they didn't.
No, that's quite tricky. What studio did you go to for that particular?
We were in Basing Street for the first album, so that later became Psalm.
Right.
So we were in Notting Hill. It was fun, but kind of we were sort of nervous, I suppose. You want to make this an incredible record. It's like, but I mean, the first album, it did well, and it's stood up. It's all right. It's just the atmosphere of the sound wasn't really right for me.
No,
but it was quite a poppy sort of piece.
Yes. And did you get quite fascinated being in the studio? Was that a moment where something clicked and you went, "Oh, this is quite intriguing"?
Well, besides doing things like, when Abbey Road came out, I'd be listening to the bass lines instead of the whole song because I was dissecting stuff as a kid. Then when I was in the studio and we were being produced, I'd hang around in the control room and see what was happening. Because I found it interesting. There was no other reason. It was like a passion. Yes. So I was learning without being taught in a way, without consciously being taught. I was learning by listening and watching.
Yes, it was quite. I guess you would have watched those documentaries of the Beatles recording their last album, that 8-hour moment, and seeing that creative process, which was quite intriguing, and conversations that were obviously no one would realise they were being recorded, apart from the people who'd stuck the mic in the flowers. But it was kind of amazing to sort of see and hear it. So when you were coming to do your second album, Don't Stop the World, what was the process like for the band? Because it's quite unwieldy in having so many members, and then you're having to sort of think of the second album.
We cut the band down for the first album. When we first signed to Warner's, there were a couple more members, and we had a guitarist who wasn't. He was like more like a banjo player, and we didn't want a banjo in the band, so we got a proper electric guitarist in for the first album. Paul Pilnick, who had been in Steelers Wheel, and he was living in Liverpool. So we got a proper rock musician in the band. And we had to, because the banjo player was going out with one of the Bright sisters, we ended up with one girl, Betty Bright, instead of two Bright sisters. So there was a duo, more like Dan Hicks and his Hot Licks in Deaf School, and it ended up as just Betty Bright with the two male singers. So that happened on the first album. So going into the second album, it was the same. We just the second album was obviously influenced by punk more.
Yes.
But it did have Taxi on it. It still harked back to the romantic sound of Deaf School, but also pushed forward and had Capaldi's on it, which was quite a banger, slammer.
Yes.
Guitar-orientated punk. We wrote it before punk, actually, but we brought it back into the set when punk happened.
Yeah.
And then it became a Deaf School classic. We still play it, and Taxi.
Because at that stage, had Eric's begun?
Yeah.
Was that because everyone
Eric started just after we did the second album, and we played the first two dates there, but it was upstairs, and I think it might have had a different name, but basically it was Eric's. Then they moved it downstairs, and all of a sudden the Clash were there. Everyone played there. If they're playing, the Devo played there. Link Ray.
Right.
There was a great mixture of music, because Roger Eagles, who would run the spinning wheel or whatever it was called in Manchester in the late 60s, he ran the club basically with Ken, who still works for us, with us. Anyway, it was quite an amazing, very classy bunch of acts that they put on there at Eric's. And it was a scene where a lot of the younger kids could come and see what was happening around the country,
Yes, and were there kind of little pockets of kind of political activists going on? Because there was also, during that 70s and 80s period, there was, I think, the Manchester Art Collective. I think there was a Liverpool Art Collective. There was a lot of these kind of little groups appearing, but obviously if you're part of that scene and had the right shoes and haircut, you were right in there, weren't you?
Right. Well, we used to... We didn't get involved in any real counterculture, anarchist kind of movements. But there was the young... oh, God, I forgot. There was a place called Aunt Twacky's, and a couple of guys, we used to rehearse there, and it was an alternative way of living kind of place. So it could have kind of been in Amsterdam or something, but it was Liverpool. And they kind of worshipped Jung.
Right.
And we did a version of the Young Ones instead of the Young Ones for them at a festival they held in the street. Where they told me the other day, actually, that they didn't get any license or anything to put on this festival, but it ran quite smoothly. So it was an alternative culture going on, but it wasn't very political. At least we weren't involved in a political scene. I mean, Bill Drummond was a friend of mine, really, an acquaintance friend. And our road crew, when we went to tour America, started big in Japan because we'd left our equipment lying around. Bill got involved in the Illuminatus scene,
yes,
with people like Bill Nye, and because there were the people at the Everyman Theatre. There were Pete Postlethwaite and Julie Walters and Bill Nye. They were all happening at the same time as Deaf School, and I think there was a meeting of some of the musicians and actors in the Illuminatus project, which came then Ken Campbell, I think he was called, and it came down to London
Yes, because I did an
the
interview
Roundhouse.
with a guy called Neil Oram, who'd worked on this thing called The Warp, which was a 10 place cycle which lasted probably about 14 hours. It could have been even longer. But that seemed to be part of that scene, didn't it, with Ken Campbell?
Right. Yeah.
So did you come across The Warp at all?
No, I didn't know. I mean, I was busy, you know. I mean,
You were juggling a lot, weren't you?
well, I mean, I was just busy with Deaf School, and if Deaf School weren't playing, I'd hang out with Big in Japan, and then I wanted to finish Deaf School, and we had an album to make, and we made a third album with Mutt Langer. We went away to make that, and they wanted us to tour America again, but I had to go and see Warner's and say I'd rather break the band up if possible, but we will tour America if we have to, you know. But and then I got straight into producing other, you know, Madness and Teardrops and stuff like that. So the Yachts.
Yes.
So I that's what I did. I wasn't political. I wasn't getting involved in too many big crossover art projects, you know, like no visual art things, no performance art things, really. I mean, Deaf School was like a bit of performance art anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was our art piece. I gave in the first album for my work at the art college, but they didn't accept it, you know.
Shocking. Well, I'm sure have they sort of gone and sorted that one out now and given you a degree after all these years?
Well, they were going to, and then not Paul Morley, Paul, what's his name, wrote a book about Deaf School.
Oh yes, this one.
Yes, that's it. There you go. Well done, blimey. And
Yes.
I think I say in it that I was bunking off to do Deaf School and things. So they promised me this honorary degree. And then after that book came out, it was kind of, we had an opening for it, and they backed off and said they couldn't because I'd said that I didn't turn up for some of the lessons or something. I was a bad example, even though I was quite a good boy, really, you know.
Yes. Well, you didn't try and. Yeah, that's always good. So yeah, how did you so you're in Deaf School, you do your third album, do the tour of America, but then how do you then find yourself on the other side of the control deck?
Because Madness were like this gang of kids before they were called Madness, and as I said earlier, I was friends with the older brother. So Mike Barson I'd see, but he'd be like this young little brother, and you ignored them, you know. But I knew him, and he turned up with his mates like Lee Thompson and Suggs and everyone to see Deaf School. They really liked Deaf School, so they saw us a couple of times. Our last date at the Roundhouse, they were there. I could see them, and I was saying hello while I was playing. And I talked to them afterwards, and they said they were starting a band. And did I want to have a listen? So I said, yeah, I'd love to. You know, Deaf School was winding down. We knew we were going to finish. And I went to their rehearsal and heard Mike Barson singing My Girl. And we borrowed £200 and went into Pathway, 8-track. And one of the tracks, we recorded My Girl with Mike singing it. And one of the other tracks was The Prince.
Right.
Suggs played it to Jerry Dammers because they had just met each other. They just changed their name to Madness then. They suddenly kind of got this big following because they were playing ska, and everyone, you know, these other bands from Coventry were playing ska. And, well, they were an amazing phenomenon, Madness, regardless of that two-tone thing. They probably would have happened anyway, but it was an amazing vehicle to jump on at that time, and they were naturally playing some ska. So it all took up. So Jerry put out The Prince on two-tone. Stiff Records had turned down Madness, I think, at that point, and we had a hit. Then that was a hit. Then Stiff Records wanted them, and they signed to Stiff. And then I was asked to do the first album.
Yes, with
And
Alan.
I'd worked with Alan Winstanley before, and he was known by Stiff Records as well. And they put us together, and we wanted to work together, so it worked out.
Was there kind of natural chemistry?
Me and Alan?
Yes.
Well, he was really good at what he did, and I was keen on what I was doing. And they had worked with me, and they wanted me to be part of the production. So I knew with Alan, we were going to get a record that sounded good.
Yeah.
I'd worked with him in a studio called TW in Fulham, and when he was engineering, the stuff sounded great, and you'd think, oh, that's a great studio, everything sounds great in there. You go back, someone else was engineering, and it wouldn't sound great. So you could kind of work out from that why things sounded good.
What was your bit? What was your sort of segment that was particularly your strong point or strength?
Well, in a production team?
Yes.
Well, coming from the songwriting, coming from being in a band, coming from arranging, coming from having ideas about instrumentation, backing vocals, basically producing, but without being an engineer and without having to worry about that. And I mean, Alan and I would cross over occasionally into, he'd say, well, that middle eight could be better, or this, what about if they did that? So he was doing the same as me. And I'd sometimes say, well, wouldn't it be great if we had a fuzz box on the bass? And, and we normally agreed on what we were doing together, so everything was made quite effortlessly.
Yeah, so it's kind of fascinating, because I've done a lot of interviews with producers, bizarrely, and it's kind of, I mean, most of them have had quite sort of iconic moments. And there was a guy who was probably created the sound of the 90s, especially the American sound, with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Soul Asylum, Soundgarden, Marilyn Manson, and Hole. And it was kind of interesting. Mostly he only worked on one album because he really made them work hard and would reject lots of material, saying, no, that's not good enough. So there was a lot of tension, but he would get the album, which was the classic, and then they would never speak again. So he sounded like he really contributed a lot to the material, as well as kind of being no, that's not good enough. You need to go away and write some more stuff now. So did you have a little bit of that yourself?
Yeah, but I'd do it in a really, I think, in quite a human way, not in a dictator's, not in a Trump manner. And that's why we lasted with Madness, so we could continue that process where I would be in control. I was, with Alan, we were in control. But if someone really didn't want to do something, then we'd discuss it and, try and make our points, and maybe the artist might win, whatever.
Yes.
It didn't, it didn't matter. The record had to be made, and sometimes, quite often, I was wrong, about things. And part of the job is admitting that. And say with Dexys, part of the job was leaving things as they are, because Kevin had just done an amazing job of getting everything in shape. Unlike Madness, who would be they'd come with a couple of ideas maybe sometimes, and we could push that into becoming a song, as with quite a few other bands, like, I don't know, Lloyd Cole with Lost Weekend. I listened to as soon as you heard the backing track, you knew he hadn't written any words or the melody, but you knew you kind of had a hit record, possibly.
Yes.
If he came up with the goods. And
well, what was it like with Teardrop? With like something like Treason, or
Treason was a good story. That was a good example of what I do or did, which was the outro became the chorus.
Right.
Treason, it's just a story. That was just the outro. So I suggested it was the chorus. So then we could put the song together, and that would be the chorus. On that, and I argued with Dave Balfe quite a bit about that, but I got my way on that one.
Yes, and then you obviously have a good relationship with Madness and do there is sort of is it the sort of the next album as well, which has got Tomorrow, Just Another Day. How did you find the band at that stage?
Well, the worrying thing, second album, you're worried. I was worried until I heard Embarrassment, and then I wasn't worried anymore, and we just work on it and do the best we could at that time. But they were on the road a lot, and then they were really busy, so they became, and they as people they were growing up. Suggs was 17 when I first met him. I mean, like he was probably 20, by the third album or something, and he was about to get married, and I don't know. They were. It was. You had to deal with the change in people's lives and personality. They were famous. They were they had money.
Yes.
Whereas the first album, they had fuck all. It's like, who's going to pay for them to have a light and bitter?
Yes, it's quite a different gig, isn't it? Really, and
Yeah.
I guess you can also see the downfall of a band when they have the hangers on as a success and money starts to appear and people start sniffing around a bit.
Well, and then there was a lot of pressure from Stiff to have another hit. So you'd have 4 hits, and they want another hit, and it's not easy, And then you want another hit, and then oh god, what are we? So something like the House of Fun was the Chemist Facade. It was called. It didn't have a chorus. It didn't have Welcome to the House of Fun. I've told this story a lot, but so that had to be worked on and put in place, and all of a sudden we had Madness's first number one, and that was quite late on, really. And then we had to follow that up, and then so there was quite a lot of pressure for them, and
Yes.
and us, to then record companies were just employing you because they thought you could have a hit, and sometimes they'd forget that what you're dealing with. You just do the best with what you're given. You can't guarantee it. I can't guarantee a hit record,
No, but then when you did Punch the Clock, which was kind of one of my, favorite albums for that summer and year, and I still know every song and word so well. What was it like with that particular one? Because that is a very polished vibe, isn't it? But the
Yes.
songwriting is very strong.
Well, do you know the story about that? I mean, it was
No.
basically, I mean, they made amazing records with Nick Lowe, my hero, and then all of a sudden, I got to know Elvis because he liked my solo EP, and that's how I got into the whole Jake Riviera stable and Radar Records and everything. And when I did my first gig with the Boxes after Deaf School, Elvis came up and supported us on the Royal Iris without being advertised and without really telling me. He said, "Can I come up and play before?" I thought he'd come with an acoustic guitar. The whole band came up and played Chelsea, Detectives, Allison, and I went on and did the first show I'd ever done. Anyway, I got to know Elvis Costello, and then I asked him to work with me on shipbuilding. And then being managed by Jake, both of us, and we were having all these hits, and Elvis's hit period was going downhill a bit. We were brought in to get him a hit, especially in America. And we were kind of at our peak of 80s polished production around that time, with It Must Be Love and Our House,
Yes.
things like that. So we went in making one of those 80s polished records, and while we were doing it, we kind of agreed that we were going to be a bit Marvin Gaye with it as well, and that's how we ended up with Every Day I Write the Book, which started off sounding like a song from the Beatles' 8 Days a Week period. And then we kind of listened to Marvin and whatever, and ended up with something which had a character all of its own, really, which was Every Day I Write the Book, and
Yes.
it was a hit in America. So it was a job we did what we were asked to do. The only problem with that album was that Elvis didn't like it. But there you go. He finished it, and he liked it until we finished it. And then I think he was a bit frightened of it, the gloss. You know, he was more roots.
Yes.
You know, yeah, naturally he's a rootsy kind of guy. The music's more roots. So this was a bit 80s and polished.
It was a bit. Well, I say that
It kind of worked. It really worked. So, you know.
Well, Let Them Talk. There's a fantastic vocal on it where he almost drops or he just picks it up. I don't know if you must know it because you were there in the studio, but I just always love that way that it all feels like he's almost lost it and then he's got it and it kicks in. And I just think Let Them All Talk is just a stunning vocal performance.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I remember doing the intro and just thinking, well, we should have talking everywhere, talking there, talking here, let them talk. You know, and it was kind of that they were the sort of things I was thinking about quite a lot, and making it like audio excitement, you know.
Yes. It's when he sings "Killing Time." We just,
Yeah.
and it's just this moment of just
Yeah.
I still think it's blissful. Which
I must listen to it again. You know, I haven't listened to it for years.
No, which is kind of. But were you then also kind of being influenced by those people? Like you had Robin Miller doing Sade, you had the Trevor Horn production. You know, there was kind of you know, the Smiths were coming along in '83 with that kind of some of their work. Stephen Street and people like that were starting to appear. You know, how were you then as an artist and as a producer, sort of coping with it all so much kind of activity?
I think the only one. I really like Nick Lowe, and Chris Thomas was making my favourite records, really, with the Pretenders and stuff and Roxy Music, and Nick Lowe and Trevor until what's her name? Oh God, you're going to have to edit this.
No, that's fine. Is this Trevor Horn?
Yeah, Grace Jones.
Grace Jones, yes.
Know, when he came out with that record, that blew me away completely. Before that, I was a bit, you know, I mean, I really liked Relax and everything. Yeah, Trevor was a competitor. You couldn't ignore it. This sound that he was doing, but he was making different kinds of records. We were working more with the band and pushing the sound of the band, and he was making records that sounded like Trevor Horn. You know, if you went to work with him, you'd get a Trevor Horn record. I don't think people could tell straight away that it was a Langer Winstanley record. You know, as far as I could tell.
Because as indie classics go, you got Lost Weekend, and then you had Brand New Friend. Yeah. Again, two amazing songs. When you were in the studio with those, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about Lost Weekend, but did you think this is great? This is great material.
Well, Brand New Friend was the first thing we did with them, and I just really enjoyed doing it. But we did it. We used all our 80s tricks, you know. But we had the backing vocalist, probably Aphrodisiac or the three Jimmies we used to use. You know, we had. It was pretty 80s, and the drum sound, you know, like Steve Lillywhite had done that kind of live drum sound thing. So we were aware of other hit records, especially if they did sound really good, and we were competing with them without copying, I hope. I mean, in fact, you know, I met Trevor when he was doing the Malcolm McLaren record with Malcolm in a club in New York, and he said to me, "Oh, I really liked It Must Be Love," and I think he'd done ABC then, and It Must Be Love has got those pizzicato strings, plonk, plonk, plonk.
Yes.
Plonk, plonk. And then the ABC record had plonk, 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 plonk on it. And I said, I noticed. You know, I just remember being a bit cheeky. And so he was obviously listening to our records as well.
Nice.
So I think it's a natural thing. You know, I mean, it's you're listening to to records that you think are in the similar area. I wasn't listening to most of the chart.
No, because a few years ago I did an interview with Mark Saunders, who's a producer. Who,
Well, he
I
was
think
our engineer.
he was your and yes, he remembers the Bowie Jagger dancing in the street quite well. He's got fond memories of that.
Yeah, he kept a record of the Bowie singing like Iggy and everything else we did for a laugh, and it was him, I suppose, or maybe the tape op. He was like the assistant engineer then, Mark, and he kept that tape, and it kind of annoyed me because when David died, he released it, and I don't think he should have done that really. But there you go, because we promised we wouldn't.
Yes.
But, or at least I did. So maybe Mark didn't know that I'd promised that I wouldn't.
Right, yes. And was there much...
Bowie thought we'd wiped it all.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
But anyway, Mark was great. We did a lot of work with him, and
yes,
he was good, and he did well, didn't he? Went off to America, I think.
He had his kind of, I think what I've noticed, like a lot of artists, is that they have a zeitgeist moment. It's like, my God, you did everything. And then the next decade, comes along. I mean, as, like with Bowie, his 70s work is amazing. His 80s work, I've just been trying to listen to tonight, which is like odd, there's a bit of a reggae, there's salt, it's kind of fascinating
with drum and bass because he'd think it was cool.
Yes, and it was a fascinating album tonight because it is kind of, after Let's Dance, it's like this is, it's not terrible, but it's just kind of odd. And then you had Never Let Me Down. So what was it like was that the first time you'd worked with him with Dancing in the Street?
Well, yeah, that was Dancing in the Street happened because we were working on Absolute Beginners, the film.
Yes.
I mean, the whole meeting David Bowie happened because we were producing most of the work, the music for the film Absolute Beginners. And he then joined the film and they asked him to write the key song. So we ended up, and he accepted the fact that we could produce him, which was amazing because he might have got in whoever, to do it. So we ended up working with David Bowie.
Yes.
And then Dancing in the Street we just did this as the same day we did the backing track for Absolute Beginners. He said, Mick's coming down later. We're doing a charity record for Live Aid. It's only going to be a video. He said, can we just do it in this session? I said, yeah, amazing. Yeah, great. So we did Dancing in the Street that evening.
Just like that. And yes, it must have been quite a thrill seeing two icons.
Yeah. I mean, like Mick, I was a bit scared of Mick. You don't know what to say to him. I mean, David is very friendly and Mick's a bit cooler, or he was then,
Were you coping with the rock and roll lifestyle when you're having this success, with drinking and
I was coping with it. It was like I was enjoying it, and I coped with it, for decades. But that got out of hand more, the last 15 years. I mean, I haven't drunk for 3 years really now, but I became quite alcoholic, and it was progressive. I worked and used alcohol always, right from the beginning. When I went into that first Madness rehearsal in 78, I had a 4-pack of beer with me. So I remember that. I was kind of relying on alcohol because maybe I was a bit shy, a bit nervous, and it helped me cope with dealing with people I didn't know,
Well, that's fair enough. But then it becomes, you become a functioning alcoholic by mistake, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, I know all about it now. I knew about it. I knew I was alcoholic for about 25 years before I gave up. And I was always admitting it. And I drank on almost every session I ever did. So it's just part of who I was.
Yes. So, and because when you did They Might Be Giants, you did their third album. Is this the first time you went to America to do production work and produce an album?
No, we did a band called the Nightcaps for Seymour Stein. quite early on, probably just around the time of the second Madness record.
Right.
And the Giants was just after we worked with Morrissey. So that was quite a long time later, quite a few years later.
Yes.
But then after Bush, we then went to America quite a lot in the early 90s because they were the big thing in America. Yeah.
Yes, God. Because then you obviously you do some amazing work with dear old Morrissey, who had, was the soundtrack for 5 years of my life. What was it like, kind of seeing another completely different artist, up close working?
Yeah. Well, we had, by this point, we had Hook End Manor, which we bought from Dave Gilmour. It's a big, sprawling 16th century estate that Claude, what's his name, who started Selfridges, owned in the 30s and 40s. I've forgotten his second name. Anyway, it was an incredible mansion, and Gilmour had it, and it was for sale. And he sold it to us quite cheaply because we wanted to build a studio there. We'd worked in the Manor. I think we did China Crisis in the Manor.
Right.
And I thought we could do better than this. We could make a better studio. The control room in the Manor and the studio wasn't great. Anyway, so Morrissey, EMI decided that we should get together with Morrissey, and it was the end of his time with Stephen Street, and see what happened. So he was sent to Hook End Manor, and I met him there, and we started recording that day, and it didn't sound very good, and I was feeling not very confident. I went for a walk with him and said, don't worry about this. We don't have to do anything together. It's nice to have met you. We had a drink together, talked about madness and gossiped and stuff. And then when we came back from the pub, I'd left the musicians with Alan. They'd recorded the B-side, and it sounded really good all of a sudden. Maybe the Guinness helped as well.
Yes.
So we all of a sudden we were back in business, and that started a kind of 18-month period of working with him, really.
Yeah. Because you did various tracks of On Boner Drag, didn't you? And then you did Kill Uncle.
Yeah.
Which was almost his equivalent to Tonight, isn't it? It's that kind of...
Well, it was completely different. Some people, a lot of people now really like it. It was very unfashionable. It came out in the Manchester Happy Mondays period and sounded nothing. It sounded really unfashionable. But if you check it out, really, I think it's a really good album. And I get people telling me that. And people who didn't like it at the time have gone back to it. So it's something I was really proud of, and I was proud of at the time. We'd done November and everything, that was accepted. It was a bit rockier, on Boner Drag and everything. And then, we just did... Mark Nevin came in to write with him. So it was a softer approach to the songs. And I think it was a matter of building the songs up like little dramas, little vignettes, little, almost poems to music.
Yes.
That was the feel of it. And I wanted to push that and decorate the songs in a way that, described the song, but were respectful to the song, to the lyrics and everything. And it was just... a really nice record to make. There was only a few of us in the studio, and it wasn't like a big record. It was like quite small. But anyway,
with November, you have one of my favourite albums from the 80s, which was Mary Margaret O'Hara. She did Miss America, and she's vocals. Was she in the studio with you when she did that?
Yeah, that section, we did the song. I did the music. He came and sang it. I realised what it was all about. Bit of a shock. And I was writing a piece of music at that time on the piano, and I said, I've got this music. If we put it in the middle of the song, we might be able to make a whole adventure out of this. And maybe we could have some sounds in there. And I don't know whose idea it was that the sounds were giving birth. But then once we decided that, it was like, well, who's going to do it? And he really liked the Miss America record. I knew about it, and she had an amazing voice. And she was in England at that time. So we called her up, and she came over and obliged and had dinner with us. And it was quite an experience. And all of a sudden, we had the birth.
A birth, yes. And you had Kevin on guitar, Armstrong, didn't you? Which was amazing.
He was always very helpful and creative with the whole process.
Yes. But then the 90s, it's a whole different, we'd had the grunge period, and then Britpop comes along. You've obviously had 10 years, 11, with your, from Madness from the 80s. What was it like? You get a new studio, and then you've got another decade to work. How's it going?
That studio we couldn't afford to work in normally with the people we work with. Hook End was a bit too expensive, so you get the heavy metal bands, the old rock people would work there. And Terence Trent D'Arby did his second album there, and you'd rent it out to these people for a month or two, and we needed it to be rented out because we owed so much money for building it. And so we used to work in our studios in London more. And why am I talking about this? The Britpop thing, I mean, it was, what happened with that, really? I don't know. We were doing Morrissey, and we were a bit out of touch, maybe. We were getting to be the veterans, weren't we?
Yes, well, then there's a slightly new sound.
We did There Might Be Giants. Then I went off and kind of got groovy and worked with Flowered Up and did work a Weekender.
Oh, wow, because
I kind of got pulled back into the young people's world. And,
yes.
Suddenly discovered ecstasy and, things like that. But
what could go wrong? Because that's quite an interesting one. I've done a few interviews, one with the manager and one with a member of the band. But obviously there was a lot of drugs and a bit of a sad end, wasn't there?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there was the bad drug, the drug that no one gets anywhere with, really. And I mean, it happened when we did Marilyn's hit records a few years before. And
was that the album Despite Straight Lines?
Yeah, I can't remember. I didn't even realise we finished it because, I think we did loads of Marilyn backing tracks and they never got finished. And that's kind of what happened with Flowered Up. Luckily, we got Weekender, but both the singers were into heroin, and it doesn't really go with making records that well. And they were always like running around not running around, sitting on the toilet with bits of Kit Kat wrappers and things, and falling asleep, nodding off and everything when you're trying to make a record, or not turning up was the big thing.
Yes.
So we didn't finish the Flowered Up record. We didn't finish the Marilyn record. But
did you do this single Calling Your Name, the Marilyn?
Yeah.
And did you have to do a lot of work to get that?
Well, there's a lot of backing vocals on it. There's Aphrodisiac, basically. Claudia Fontaine, who's unfortunately died. And what's her name, who was in Soul to Soul. They were our backing vocalists. So Marilyn needed quite a lot of help to just to make his voice more palatable.
Yes, I could imagine that must have been quite the one-off. It's a shame you didn't work with Terence, because that second album was quite an intriguing one, wasn't it? Neither Fish nor something, I can't remember.
Yeah, well, I think he took our stand-up piano. There was an upright piano in the dining room, and decided to put it in the swimming pool to record it. So something was going on there with his brain. He'd had his hits, hadn't he?
He had his hits.
And they were massive, and he was so amazing and brilliant. And then he thought it was a good idea to stick the piano in the swimming pool to record. I mean, I can understand Keith Moon doing it and the reasons behind that, but not to record a piano.
No, that would have been really tricky. So with your sort of, because you've got a new album coming out, but you did an album, was it sort of 2000, well, 9 years ago? So
Yeah.
with your, after the 2000s, were you still working? You were still doing. You did a Dogs Died
Yeah.
Hotcast. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Dogs Die, that was a good thing. When did we do Catatonia? We did an album with them, but then Keris ended up having to go to rehab, so they kind of cancelled the album.
was that
They
Paper
released
Scissors
it.
Stone.
Yeah, which was, there's some really good songs on that. And we were going to release Is Everybody Here on Drugs, and she went to rehab instead, and they kind of cancelled the album. So that was quite a good album that no one really heard. The Dogs Die record I was pleased with. That worked out. We did a Symposium we did a record with. Yeah, bits and pieces. But we'd had Bush. So Bush was so big in America, we kept being sent to America to work with bands that didn't do that well.
Right.
But we seemed to be working at Woodstock quite a lot, which was fun.
Yes. So with that period, because it's, I don't know if you saw the film, but there was Woodstock '99, which is one of these kind of extraordinary films that leaves you feeling a bit exhausted, a bit like Apocalypse Now. You didn't realise it was going to get any worse, and then by Sunday, all hell's broken. And
Yeah, I think we were done by then, I think.
yes. So with your 2000, after the Great Millennium Bug period, what was 2000 like? Did you?
Well,
Did,
thinking about it, what comes to my mind is Norton Folgate, which was a great Madness record again. It was not expected. I mean, we worked probably for about 9 months on getting the songs, developing the songs and stuff. And we went to work I started that record on my own with Liam at Toe Rag, 8-track. So we got Madness back to the basics. Mike couldn't track up 8 keyboards because there weren't the tracks, So that's how that album started, and it was quite a healthy way to start it. Then we moved into a 24-track, 48, whatever,
right.
And, but that was 2005. I don't know what I was doing. I suppose I started drinking a lot and
Yes.
having fun. My son was in a band called Man Like Me, and I spent about 9 years helping him do bits and pieces. And that kept me quite busy. And
Had you sold your studio, or had you kept that?
yeah, we had to. Both studios had to be sold quite quickly at certain points with tax bills and things. And we never made any money out of studios, but especially Hook End. I mean, we had incredible times there. It was it was like fairyland.
Yes,
Yeah.
would have. It would have been amazing. What was it like, sort of trying to get that release, Norton Folgate? Because that's quite a sprawling kind of piece of work, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
obviously the band had
The record
quite
company
large gaps between albums at this stage.
They had their record deal. That wasn't a problem. I mean, there were people, especially if they can get the back catalogue, everyone wants to release Madness records. I mean, they're doing a new deal right now. They sell it for 3 years.
Right.
They're fucking, making more money than they ever did, which is quite nice for their old age.
Yes.
But there was no problem with getting someone to release it. I'm trying to remember. Oh, it was who released it? I can't remember.
Was it?
But it was got a good push, big push.
Yes. Oh, you did a single for Creation Records, which I always love these moments that Alan McGee had, which was Even Though. This was this your first solo?
You're the only person who's ever listened to it.
Well, I know. Well, it's interesting because obviously Creation has this story, which we all know. But there's all these kind of funny little releases that Alan has. There was a guy called Simon Fisher Turner who did an album, which I did a couple of interviews with him, and I mean, no one could have bought some of the release he did on Creation Records at that time. So so with this single,
that came out of me working with Primal Scream. I did Imperial, a song called Imperial, and it was like a one-off, but I got to know Alan, and for some reason ended up on stage with him on my birthday Biff Bang Pow in North London, and then I recorded Even Though in the studio just after doing Absolute Beginners, and it was sweet, you know. It was like, and it was emotional, and he liked it, and he said he'd release it. So I didn't. He gave me a bottle of champagne that we drank together, I think.
Yes.
That was it.
That's the best way to end the 80s, really, wasn't it? No, I love these kind of little creation moments, because there was another artist called Momus that, you know, I don't think many people would have come across. A very cult sort of person, but very artistic.
Talking about Alan McGee, I did play him the demos. Well, this new album, half it was demos. I don't know what's a demo and what isn't a demo, but I played him some tracks about 9 months ago because he was starting a label with Youth.
Yes.
And it was like an off chance because Domino didn't want me anymore. I mean, I'm still with Domino Publishing. They didn't want to put an album out because they didn't sell any. So I was kind of, they're very supportive as people and still friends. Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah, anyway, I'll come to that later. But what am I saying?
You presented this demo to Alan McGee 9 months ago.
Yeah. So he came back into my life for a week or two, and he rejected it. So that's that story.
That's that story. But yes, so then around 2014, I guess you would have got the CLANG group back together. So what's the...
Well, we started the CLANG group around 2014. We played the first date on my 60th birthday. And I invited Lawrence because I've been working with Eugene McGuinness for Domino, and Lawrence was there, and Rob Dickens was there, and Robbo from Stiff, and lots of friends of mine for my 60th birthday at the Dublin Castle. And Lawrence liked it. He said, "Oh, I can hear the spirit of Sid in it." Sid Barrett, you know, it's more Robert Wyatt, but anyway, Sid will do it. So. You know, that was good. And he said, and I kind of pushed him. I said, well, let's do an EP. Let's do an EP, you know. And he was like, oh, okay. Yeah, all right. You know, so we did an EP. And then that led on to an album.
Practice.
Yeah. And that was great. But then the pandemic arrived. And the record didn't do anything. But we kind of had a little bit of momentum. But the pandemic arrived. And after that, about 3 years later, 3 years after not playing or not really writing much, we started again.
Yes. But did you struggle because you were looking for a bass player at this stage? Because there's yourself, John, and Gregg.
Yes, true. God, you're good. I bumped into Jamie at a Madness festival, and I was introduced, and then someone said that I'd written Shipbuilding, and he went, "Oh, my favourite song," and all that. You get that when you say Shipbuilding, people kind of fall over or whatever. You know, it's a good calling card. Anyway, he then said he was a bass player, and I said, "Well, we're looking for a bass player. Would you be interested?" And he said yes. So that was that.
Yes,
he's great. You know, it's great having his energy.
I would imagine it's nice to have a look.
His musical ability is great as well.
I would imagine, actually. So when the pandemic came about, which seems like a very surreal dream now, what was going on with you at that stage? Because obviously
I was demoing. I remember that. I kind of did, which I had to dig out a couple of them the other day because the Japanese release of the new album, New Clang, has got they wanted extra tracks, and I suddenly remembered I did these like 6 demos just before the pandemic, and there was me and the Drunken Suggs and Eugene making these demos, and anyway, 2 of them will come out on the Japanese CD.
Right. So this is quite a lot of kind of personal kind of material in this kind of 11-track.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I started writing this, we got back together again, and I'd written a couple of songs that are on the record. And so we could rehearse, right? We can rehearse. We got a couple of songs. We could do one old one and we'd do these new ones. We did a rehearsal. What we're going to do? Well, I started writing then, knowing that there was a vehicle. And right, what do we do next? Jamie's going, oh, we'll get on Jules Holland, and it's like, hang on, we need to do a gig. That's it. We'll do a gig. We need to make a record. Okay. We're going, I know how to do it. We go to Domino and say, can we make a record in your room? And they go, yeah, because you get the publishing and everything. And so we went into this demo studio or the studio, whatever it is, and did these tracks. And I'd just become sober. So I was a bit obsessed by sobriety and addiction. So suddenly there was a bit of a theme, which actually, if I made the record now, I wouldn't have gone so much into it. But at that time, it was all relevant in my life, more relevant than it is now. And so we had like 2/3 of a record, and Alan McGee didn't want to put it out. And then someone played it to Ian from Fretsaw Records, who I didn't know, and he got in touch with me and he said, I've heard your demo. I'd like to make a record. So brilliant. So then we got serious and took it to Pony Studios. I wrote another 4 songs or something, and they became, actually the last few songs were kind of some of the best in a way. Well, Page One and 14th Floor were written quite near the end of the process. And we recorded it and then tightened up all the demos in Pony so that everything sounded the same, similar.
Yes.
And we had an album.
Blimey. God, that's,
Now we're going to do a couple of dates. But
you've got dates at the end of next month.
Yeah.
Well, almost this month. Yes. So with your, when you were writing, say, Addiction, was that something that you kind of did almost like came straight out, or did you work on it? Because, it's very personal. It's got a lot of, the bottle is the answer, the bottle is the cure, these kind of, yes, it's quite open, isn't it?
Yeah, I had nothing to hide. And I find, being honest with songs not that difficult. I mean, with even those very honest, even maybe it doesn't explain exactly to the listener what's going on, but that was decades before. I mean, I find I'm being honest when I write songs. I'm not very good at doing manufactured pop songs. I'm more like a singer-songwriter, if you like, than Stock Aitken and Waterman or whatever. So that was what I was going through. I just become sober, and I went to a rehab. I came out. I still go to AA meetings. Oh, it's anonymous, really, so ignore that. I'm still working on my sobriety, and I think I always will be.
Yes, I think most people do.
Yeah. So it was on my mind, and it was what I wrote about.
Yes.
A lot of those songs are about sobriety, even if they're not obvious. Bulldozer to a certain extent. They're things that I've learned from my sobriety.
Yes, I Know Me, which is another one of those ones about identity and vodka and tea.
Yeah, that's about, if the vodka had been water and the whiskey had been tea, things would have been a bit different. But the vodka wasn't water in the end, and the whiskey wasn't tea. Or was it? It's like Southend is sliding doors as well. If you go that way, this might happen. If you went, you mean to get on a train and go to Whitstable, but you end up in Southend, and the whole journey, everything's different. But I don't really go into what is different. But that's and Page One became personal, and it hits on a similar theme. Which goes back to my dad, because he always told me when the war broke out and he was 17, he was told by the Germans, he got in line and they were all told to take a right, and he said he just darted off to the left and ran for a year and a half before getting to England. And his parents went right, and they were gone with his brother within the next 3 weeks. So that came back to me, this thing of chance and taking a left or a right, and life. You're out of control. You make a decision at the time. It's like deaf school with Warners instead of Virgin.
Yes.
Whatever. Or you go and you go with one girl and you might have gone with another girl, and your life would have been completely different.
Well, absolutely.
Or lover, whatever the sex.
Yeah. It's all. So look, just that bit where you talk about your father. Did you say he was in Germany, or did you say
he was in Poland?
He's Polish.
He was a Polish Jew,
right?
And my mother's from London, and her maiden name is Baptist, which isn't very Jewish. So I'm the outcome of these two. My mum died about just over a year ago. They lived to a really ripe old age. She was 101, and my dad lived to 94, which is incredible considering what he went through during the Second World War. Yeah.
Yes. So because I'm slightly fascinated with war stories. So he was in Poland, and he was going to get put into the Polish army or the German army?
No, he was going to be taken by the Germans as a Jew, probably.
Okay,
Polish Jew.
Yes,
I think. I mean, I don't know the exact details of that. He ended up in Romania, helping Jews to escape to Africa. So once they were in Africa, they were safe. So European Jews who were escaping the Nazis, there was a route that went to. I can't remember where it was in Africa, but anyway, he was living in a boarding house with a German soldier who didn't know what he was doing, but eventually twigged it, and my dad sussed it out. So then he had to take the route that he was helping others take, and ended up in Africa, and ended up with the British Army in Tobruk, in the siege of Tobruk.
Right.
He then got jaundice and was sent to England. And that's how he sort of probably, why I'm here.
Yes. God, that was a hell of a teenage years, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but, there's a line in page 1 that's repeated. Though tragedy and loss followed his soul, he never let them take its toll. That about him. So though tragedy and loss followed him in his life, he always had to live with them. He lived a full life and was happy a lot of the time. So that's quite. I'm always, I'm not always in my older years reflecting on that. I'm quite amazed how well he did considering what he went through.
Well, absolutely. No, that's just. Incredible, isn't it? As a teenager having to hit the road, and what then happened to his? God, sorry. What happened to his parents then? Then
they were killed within 3 weeks.
Jesus.
And his brother, I think they were killed on a train. I don't think he knew exactly how they were killed. He found out later they were dead.
Oh my God.
His uncle survived Auschwitz. And I met him when I was about 6. I remember he had a tattoo,
Yes.
So I'm actually, my son sent away, and we both got Polish passports now, which after Brexit, we thought we'd get these Polish passports. It means you can stay in Europe for over 3 months and go through a different line if this queue's too long when you're travelling. So I thought I'd better go to Poland. So I'm going to go to Poland in April for 2 weeks and go to where he was born and go to Auschwitz, etc.
Gosh, well, yeah, that's quite something, isn't it, really? God, yeah, what a story. Sorry about that. So Bulldozer then, just back onto the album. So you stop chasing bulldozers, trying to get away from you. Where does this song come from?
It's about stop following dreams, stop imagining, that you're going to get this or this is going to happen. It's like get real, get in the moment. The moment is now. it's the present, not about making plans for the future. You hit a concrete wall. I was playing with words, and messing about with an image. But basically, it's about living in the present and, not being a stupid twat.
Yes, that's I know it has to happen one day, don't it? You have to have that conversation with yourself because you think,
And then you make it into a rock record and you forget all about it.
And you think that's
you
it.
carry on. You start dreaming that the rock record's really good.
Yeah, you go back to the beginning again, and that's it. So grey to blue again, another one.
Well, that's more, that's common, more present day. The state of the world, Ukraine, everything, Gaza. Well, Gaza came after it, really, but it's more about Ukraine, and still believing there's a beauty in the everyday, regardless.
Yes.
I mean, and the conflict being so far away, and you being feeling a bit helpless in the state of the world, but still believing there's a beauty in the looking around. Things up. I'm very lucky.
Absolutely. No, I know, and we live in a moment where you suddenly notice it's lighter in the mornings and afternoons, and birds are chirping, and it feels surreal when so much is going disastrously odd. So yes, it's good to remember that moment with nature. And Wrong House, how does this fit in with this?
Oh, Wrong House. That was just messing about, probably like a McCartney song or something. It's not my favourite. I like the idea that you're going to the wrong house, and everything's different. And it was partially about, at that time, I felt a bit uncomfortable in my own house or skin. It was after sobering up and, questioning stuff. But really, then playing around, it was a bit of a joke, really. You're just getting in the wrong house and it was a dream as well.
Right.
It says so at the end. It's a dream.
It's a dream.
It's like, when you dream, you open the door to your house and it's not your house. It was one of those.
Yes. Well, my dreams are normally about trying to get somewhere and it's sort of missing something or not being able to find it. And then the time is ticking and you realise you've missed that moment or that appointment. It's just a recurrent thing. I wish I didn't have that dream. It feels exhausting when you wake up, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
So the album's out this coming February 2025. You got some live dates, and then what else have you got on the kind of the horizon?
I haven't really thought much further. I mean, we're going to play at the Madness in November at the House of Fun, and we're going to support Ian Prose at the 100 Club on May the 3rd.
Right.
And so we just need. I'm kind of getting this period of the album coming out done, and then we'll see what happens next. I mean, as this process has happened, I've never known much more. I haven't known what's going to happen in the future, I mean, again, we've just been talking about don't look into the future, live in the present. And I'm kind of doing that to a certain extent. We could do with some more gigs. We could do with, playing live. I think we'd get good if we played live a bit more often.
Yes, that would be the ideal thing. Well, look, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this. I've really loved listening to the album and
That's
also
great. Thank you.
And sort of getting sort of familiar with that, and also being quite nice to listen to some of your early album work from the 70s,
right?
And discovering those little hidden gems on Creation Records.
Right, amazing you did.
But it's always nice to hear what people done, and also put it in the context of the time. It's that 86, 87 period. It was, what was going on. The Thatcher years, the poll tax was about to happen. Music was shifting again. The new romantics were completely over. Manchester was the dance scene. Ecstasy was coming along. So it was all, there. And yes, you brought out your single on Creation Records. You were part of that story.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's funny doing these interviews. We haven't, the whole, it's just looking back, it's kind of interesting. And the impact of Deaf School on Liverpool was quite phenomenal in a way. And it was never planned to be. It just, that's the way it happened. So I'm quite proud of what happened. It's good.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because I think with Britpop, all those people who were making those records had gone to gigs in the 80s and seen all those indie bands. But the indie bands were like, no one had really heard of them. And I think now they're getting a bit more notice because Cherry Red Records loves reissuing box sets and obscure compilations. And actually all the bands that I've interviewed for the 80s all mention Eric's and Deaf School. So you mentioned the Yachts, which is also, it's immaterial. And then you had all that, Life is Hard and Then You Die. And just, people went to Eric's in that scene, wasn't there? And you got all those interviews with people like Jane Casey and Bill Drummond, and then the guy from the Lightning Seeds and Holly from Frankie, and it's like, okay, that's where it started. It wasn't the Beatles, it was Deaf School, wasn't it?
Yeah, at that time. Yeah, nothing had happened for a decade or so. I must have a piss.
Yes,
so
well, look,
goodbye.
I better say on that bombshell. But it does happen.
Very much. It was really nice to talk to you.
Take care, Clive. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Indeed, the best way to end any interview, I would say. A massive thank you to Clive Langer for giving me the time for that. As I said, there's a new album coming out, new Clang. This is going to be the 21st of February, 2025, from the Clang Group. So I will put a link in the notes below. This has been the C86 Show. You can contact me on all the social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show, David Eastaugh. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. So check them out. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.